Hey there, my name is Cameron, better known as Venus Theory. I am a professional musician, sound designer, and content creator. I have been doing music for pretty much my entire life, and I've been using Cubase now for the better part of a decade. And welcome to Bleux Studios here in Middle Tennessee, version maybe 12.0 or something like that at this point, and this is my home studio. I come from a really small farm town out in the middle of Illinois. I wanted to write and record music, but it's not like there were many musicians around where I lived, and I certainly couldn't just walk into a recording studio. So as a teenager, I got into home production because I had learned a couple of other instruments and I figured I could record a track piece by piece and build it up into a full song. I downloaded some different tools and free programs, but I always felt like making a real song was just out of reach, and it was never something I was going to be able to do on my own, especially at home. I started using Cubase in college after I was introduced to it by my roommate, and to be honest, it kind of freaked me out a little bit at first, because here I was, this kid from some random farm town in the middle of nowhere, and after installing Cubase, I suddenly had a full professional studio's worth of tools on my laptop in my apartment, and it was a very weird and incredibly inspiring feeling. Cubase to me has always felt like a very all-in-one solution with anything related to production and audio work, whether you want to just get started writing and recording your own songs like I did, or making some beats with your friends, or even recording your next album, or going beyond that, doing something like arranging music for an orchestra, or scoring a film, or doing sound design for big video games, or doing things related to ambisonic audio, and just about everything in between, or a mix of all of the above. Cubase is the tool you need to just get work done, and I think more importantly, get it done to a professional standard. Throughout my weird and sort of twisty career in the music business, Cubase has always remained one of very few constants. Whether it was me first learning how to record and mix audio, to first learning how to use a synthesizer, to now doing sound design and production and music work with some of the biggest brands in the industry, Cubase has been there right alongside me every step of the way, growing and evolving just as much as I do. With all that said, today I wanted to share with you 5 tips I've learned over the years to set up a professional home studio to start making your music and productions come to life, with Cubase, of course, right there as the centerpiece. The first and most obvious step in your home studio journey is selecting the right room, and of course this is really only applicable if you even have a choice in the matter. Over the years, I've worked out of everything from super small studio apartments and using a closet as a makeshift vocal booth, to rooms more like this one where I'm able to totally change and convert the space into something that's a lot more ideal and a lot more suited to being a studio/recording environment. If you're starting out your home studio in your current space, you're moving to a new space, or buying a house or something like that, be sure to take the time to test out all the possible contenders for the room you're going to build your studio in, and maybe even bring along an instrument or two to play in there just to get an idea of how the room sounds naturally, because picking the best sounding room is going to save you a lot of work and a lot of headache later on. The most ideal rooms would probably be rooms that are a little bit larger and have less parallel surfaces. This is because they don't naturally reflect a lot of sound, and that's why I chose this space for my studio. It's a relatively large room, but it's got big angled walls, so even before I did any kind of acoustic treatment or bringing in any of my gear, the room sounded pretty good on its own. Another very important consideration is the physical layout of the space. If you're just getting started, you might have a pretty straightforward setup, something as simple as a desk, a chair, and a laptop. Over time, you might change your layout a bit by adding a bigger desk, bringing in some more instruments, adding some new gear, maybe bringing in monitors if you don't already have them, or anything like that. So it's important to remember that your studio is a living, breathing, dynamic space that will change just like you will throughout your career in music. So it's important to take a minute just to think a couple steps ahead and consider where things might go, because there's nothing more frustrating than outgrowing a space before you're fully able to take advantage of it. Speaking of the sound of your room, typically acoustic treatment is the next step in your home studio build. While it is possible to build a pretty acoustically ideal environment, or even a totally soundproof and sound isolated room, it's often incredibly expensive and very labor intensive, so it's not typically feasible for a home studio build, so we need to resort to some other stuff. One of the first things you might buy for acoustic treatment in your home studio is those little foam panels. I'm sure you've seen them. I know I've gone through probably hundreds of them over the years, but I really don't recommend these because they don't do that good of a job. Instead, I would suggest you get some acoustic panels like the ones you see hanging behind me and all around the room here. I actually built these myself, and the best part is they only cost a couple of dollars each, and it was all done using stuff I could find at my local hardware store and my local craft store to get the fabric that goes around them. It's just some really cheap lumber, some insulation, a couple of screws, and some staples, and that's really it. But what's really cool is they're super lightweight, so you can actually hang these using stuff you would use to hang pictures around your house. So even if you're renting a space like an apartment or whatever, you can hang these up without ripping your walls apart and causing a bunch of damage, which is awesome because they're pretty sturdy and they'll last a long time. I've had these for a couple of years, they've moved around with me a bunch, and I'm sure they'll serve me well for many years to come. Panels like these are a really cost-effective way to start doing acoustic treatment in your home studio. You only need a couple of them, and they really do a great job at soaking up a lot of the sound without making the room feel overly dead. But one thing that's maybe a bit overlooked, especially when it comes to home studio builds, is practical acoustic treatment that you probably have lying around right now. One of the first things you can do is use carpet or rugs. If you're in a carpeted room, you're pretty much halfway done already. Otherwise, you can lay down some rugs or change out your flooring for some nice thick carpet to prevent any reflections on the floor and allow the floor to soak up some sound. When it comes to windows, you can use some big thick acoustic curtains or just some dense light blocking curtains. This is a great way to prevent reflections as well as prevent sound from leaking in or out. Outside of that, there's a lot of furniture and other really practical items that do a good job at working as functional acoustic treatment. Behind my mixing desk, I've got my big couch that's really comfy to hang out on, but it's also a really good acoustic absorber and kind of a bass trap right behind my mix position. I've got my fabric cabinets that I use to store my microphones and cables and other things. There's other furniture and wall art and other things around the room that just help to absorb or break up and diffuse sound to make the room a pretty decent acoustic environment without me having to spend a fortune on a bunch of specialty acoustic treatment tools. With your room picked out, your gear in place, and your acoustic treatment done, the next big step is probably going to be your actual workstation and especially monitoring. Now, while I'm not an acoustic scientist or a super expert at this by any means, there are some things I've learned through making a lot of mistakes over the years that I find give the best results when it comes to monitoring in your home studio. One of the things I wish I knew early on is getting the right size of monitors for your room. Of course, it's very tempting to get the big shiny ones, but oftentimes these are overkill, especially for a home studio. Do a bit of research and try to find if a 5, 7, or even 8-inch speaker will do best in your room. Typically, the smaller the room, the smaller speaker you will need. While smaller speakers won't nearly replicate the bass, they will give you more accurate monitoring for your room, and you can use something like high-grade mixing headphones to check the low end. When it comes to the actual physical setup and location of the monitors, there's a couple of tips I've learned over the years that I think are really handy to make them much more functional and accurate. First up, you want to get them off your desk if you have the space for it and put them on some stands. I've got my monitors off on some monitor stands, and then they are angled inwards rather than pointing directly back. I mixed like this for a very long time, and it took me a minute to understand that that really didn't do much of anything. Once you've got your monitors on stands, you want to try and form an equilateral triangle, meaning the distance between the two speakers and the speakers to you is more or less the same, and you want to place them a little bit away from the wall, especially if they're rear-firing monitors with bass ports right on the back. Setting your monitors at the right height is critical as well to get the best and most accurate results. To do this, you just want to make sure the tweeters or the little speakers where the high frequency sounds come out are in line with your ears. The big cones don't really need to be in line with your ears because high frequency sounds are very directional, so if they're not pointed right at your ears, you really won't hear it, but the mid-range and low end are much less directional and sound more or less the same regardless of where those cones are in relation to your ears. Beyond that, you want to make sure your monitors aren't going to reflect off anything like your desk or any instruments or keyboard stands around you. You want to make sure maybe your screen isn't in the way and other things like that could cause the sound of the monitors to be impeded and less accurate. Also, take the time to get familiar with your monitors and adjust them if they offer any adjustment points. My monitors, for instance, sound pretty good, but always felt a bit bright, so I took the high end down a couple notches, and that makes them sound a little more transparent and accurate and helps me get the sounds that I'm after with my mixes. Of course, not every studio and not every budget can accommodate having monitors, so if you're in a smaller space where you can't have a good monitoring setup or you simply can't afford it at this point in time, you can always invest in a good pair of mixing headphones. Mixing headphones are a little bit different than your consumer grade listening headphones in that they're designed to be a bit more flat and transparent, but they do more or less the same job as a good set of monitors. So always getting the best set of mixing headphones you can afford is a pretty safe bet when it comes to monitoring and mixing in your home studio. I always check my mixes on headphones, and a good pair of mixing headphones can go a very long way. In the end, as home studio owners, we are musicians, we are producers, we are composers, we are artists, and building building a space that inspires you to get and stay creative is time very well spent. One of the easiest things you can do to get your space to be a bit more inspiring is simply clean it up a bit. Take some time to clean up and organize things, and of course do a bit of cable management, because after all, no one really likes tripping over MIDI cables in the middle of a session, especially when you're trying to carry some gear around. This way, when you walk in your room, you're just ready to create. There's not that little task list running in the back of your mind of things that need cleaned and changed and moved around. Your studio should be a space where you walk in and you feel excited to get creative. So take some time to personalize it to your taste. Slap up some paint on the walls, change out the curtains, bring in some furniture, bring in some cool decorations, maybe bring in a few fun lamps, or go all out and maybe bring in some kind of fun but maybe a bit goofy and impractical lighting, because this is a great way to make your space dynamic and interesting and change the tone and mood of the space and the room to work with your session and evolve with the process. So that way you're totally in it 100% of the time, and you're in a zone that is exactly what you need to foster the creative process and set your sessions up for success. As one last piece of advice, remember to plan your studio setup carefully, and don't forget to add a way to back up all of your projects and other important documents, whether that's using an external hard drive or even something like a home media server. Another important point to remember is to not buy gear just for the sake of having it. While it would be really fun and exciting to go out and buy all this stuff all at once, you really don't need every single thing all the time, and remember that every piece of gear should be an investment and play an actual practical role in your setup. Hopefully this video gave you a couple ideas to start your own home studio build or renovate your existing space. And when your studio's ready, be sure to post a picture and tag Steinberg, and feel free to tag me as well, because we'd love to check out what kind of setups you've got that you're using to create with Cubase. For more videos like this one and for updates on all things Cubase, don't forget to subscribe to the channel down below. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.